that was the first thing. And I saw it very fast when I saw Bitcoin 2012. After Europe, I realized, okay, yeah, I get this totally. This is the future of everything. So now we've got this monetary printing and it's offsetting the demographics. And, you'll see all the charts and people who are watching it will see, I mean, it's kind of spooky. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And you realize, okay, I get this now. It's all the same thing. But out of 2008 comes the rise of asset prices and the collapse, and wages don't go up for the wages.
Right.
So now it's become even harder for anybody to catch up. And now they can't get access to credit either. Not for a long time, not for 7 or 8 years before people could start borrowing again, because the banks wouldn't lend it to them. Because regulation said, well, the banks, you screwed up, so we're going to stop you lending. Good thing, probably. But it meant that people get poorer, but the debt didn't make them richer anyway. So nobody's winning here. Nobody is winning. And then the monetary printing, without people realizing, people think at first, and I think most people still think today, that the money goes into the banks, it gets lent out, and assets go up because people buy assets. It's simply not true. If you look at the volume of the S&P, it hasn't risen. It's the fall in the denominator that is causing all of this to rise. Right. i.e. the debasement is making you poorer. And, I've talked about this on Twitter and people don't get it. They think I'm being ridiculous, but this is not, when I show those simple charts divided by the balance sheet,
right?
This is not some random chart. This is this whole thread that has got me to understand why this has happened.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time and bit by bit to build on this understanding. What got me to get to this point? So I understood all of this, and I understood the balance sheet was a function of demographics, and debt was a function of demographics. It was all part of the same picture. I and everybody else start shouting, it's an everything bubble. How does that work? If it's an everything bubble, why is nobody getting rich apart from the very rich who've got access to capital? I then start thinking, well, I lived through and worked through and invested through 2000, and that was a bubble because equities decoupled from gold, from real estate, from everything, right? And assets have a relative valuation, always have in history. So basically, gold versus real estate is a trade-off everybody will make at a certain point. If real estate is crazy expensive versus gold, at some point, the flow of capital goes the other way because it's an asset. So what's got the higher expected return in the future, right? It's very logical behavior. And equities work the same. They all have this long-term range. The only thing that doesn't, which catches everybody out, is industrial commodities and agricultural commodities. Why? Because technology. You can get more out of the ground.
Right. Yeah.
At cheaper prices, or you grow more bushels of wheat per hectare. So those things get cheaper. So CPI gets cheaper because of technology, computing power, all of this stuff, but the actual assets don't get cheaper. So I looked at all of these and like the S&P versus gold is kind of in line, nothing wild, like one standard deviation expensive for equities, nothing crazy. And real estate the same. So I'm like, what happens if it's something else? What happens if we're just looking at the wrong denominator? And then I thought, well, if the Fed balance sheet is a function of demographics and it is putting the missing layer in, are they actually debasing the currency? And therefore, if we were to denominate it, basically to discount the dollar by the amount the Fed balance sheet's grown,
right,
would that show us the truth? And suddenly the charts became really bloody logical because everyone kind of feels like you didn't get richer. The average person definitely did not get richer after 2008. And when you look at it, the assets didn't perform in line with the balance sheet. So therefore, they didn't perform in line with the debasement. So the S&P basically just about made up since 2008, not over 2008. We lost that. It's never coming back. Well, it might do, but it'll take another 20 years. And, gold, real estate, none of these really recovered. They just basically follow the balance sheet. So then I thought I'd head check myself on that too, because, everyone was calling me an idiot for saying this. So then I took the UK property prices and divided it by the Bank of England balance sheet, flatline. German property prices, flatline. Swedish property prices, flatline. Canadian property prices, flatline. Australian property prices, flatline. I'm like, wow. Yes, this is it. This is debasement. and debasement makes it look deceptively like the value of the assets is going up.
Right.
It's not. It's the value of the denominator falling. There were two assets that significantly beat the balance sheet and is above 2008. And they're bloody obvious what they are. One is Bitcoin and the other is the NASDAQ. Because technology and this network effects business model, the digital age is relentless and destroying everything in its path. So all profits accrue. We get that. And that became amazing to me to realize what is now going on. So that 2008 is what gives rise, the final push off the edge of the cliff to populism everywhere. But if you go back then, so 2008, another, era defining thing happens, which is the Satoshi white paper, right? That's all a function of this. It's all a function of the same thing. And I think this whole thing ends with a whimper and not a bang. If it was going to end with a bang, it would have done it last year. If there was no intervention by government, it was the end of everything. But it didn't happen that way. So they've got the trick that they know is debasement, hides the reality. So what's interesting is people have started to figure this out. They've started to figure out they're getting screwed. And the figuring out getting screwed drives you to look for answers. The traditional answer was gold. Hasn't done great. It's done okay. It's done its job. But the problem is the millennials can't generate wealth. If gold defends your wealth,
right? There's nothing to defend.
Nothing to defend.
Yeah.
So it becomes incredibly difficult to generate wealth. Bitcoin comes along, it changes the equation. It takes a long time for people to see it, but these things, this adoption takes a while. But people realize, okay, here is a construct, a technological construct that has ubiquitous global scarcity. And therefore, if we all perceive it to have value, then it shall be so. And so the migration begins. And I think of it as a migration to this parallel financial system that's being built in front of your eyes. The rise of DeFi was the other huge thing that happened. People haven't got their heads around what this means yet. But it is gigantic. Because basically, people don't trust financial intermediaries any longer. Again, they want to blame somebody, so blame the banks. It wasn't the bank's fault. They just did the rational thing.